Welcome everyone to Government Contractor Chat. We are going to get started now. I am Lindsay Riegelsberger, Director of Operations and Business Development for Streamline Government Contracts. Streamline helps small to mid-sized government contractors who seek experienced, effective support with contract management that reduces risks, increases profits, and enhances reputations. We do this by negotiating teaming agreements, subcontracts, preparing estimates of completion when necessary, and speaking to contracting officers in their own language. We are the proud organizers of Government Contractor Chat, and we thank you for joining us today. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker now. David Stearman is the founder and CEO of Proposal Strategy and Development Consulting and a GovCon veteran with more than 26 years of experience. PSDC helps small and mid-sized GovCons operating across the federal, state, local, and international ecosystems succeed and thrive in the volatile market by providing full spectrum proposal support, including direct support, staff augmentation, training, coaching, and mentoring and consulting services. PSDC values relationships over transactions, service to clients, and honesty, transparency, and integrity. It provides added value to clients by helping them build internal capacity as they grow and mature. Let's welcome David Stearman.
Okay, thank you. And let me just hide my meeting. So we will put that. So today we're going to talk about the pivot. Obviously, there's been a lot going on in the GovCon world in the past several months. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and what we can and should be doing about it. So this is just a quick summation of what I'm going to address today. Some of these things will be familiar to you. I don't claim to be the first to talk about these things or the smartest to talk about these things or any of that. That's why I really do encourage this to be a conversation and a dialogue rather than me speaking from the mountaintop with my wisdom. I might like to think I have some interesting things to say, but I want this to be a dialogue because all of us can be teachers and all of us can be learners. And so this is what we'll get through in this presentation. So where do things stand now? Pretty obvious. I think most of you are already aware of all of these things. The key point here is that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of chaos. And obviously that makes it difficult for those of us in the GovCon world to operate and plan and strategize because we just don't know what's happening tomorrow or even today. Let's be honest. I mean, things are happening very quickly, and often there's a lot of what I call here fits and starts, but really backing and forthing. For example, mass firings at agencies and then rehirings of many of those same people because, oh, by the way, we didn't realize we needed to have people who knew how to protect our nuclear secrets, so we better hire them back again, right? So it's things like that that are making this an incredibly challenging time for all of us. And so hopefully we can get some clarity today and figure out some things to do about it. So the three main pieces of the activity are DOGE, the FAR 2.0, and the GSA consolidation. These are just a few of the impacts of DOGE that we've seen already. A lot of things have already been canceled and terminated. Procurements have been paused or canceled. I had a client just last week that reached out to me and said, hey, we've got something we want to respond to and we'd like your help. And then the next day they got back to me and said, oh, we just found out it was canceled that quickly. So that's part of the chaos and uncertainty. Obviously, lots of layoffs within the federal agencies that we deal with. There also are the ripple effects within industry. Revenue and cash flow obviously significantly impacted. And that's causing a lot of the industry partners to have to lay people off. So it's a real, I would say, scary time right now. FAR 2.0, also much in the news. The stated goal is to streamline procurement and to get it back to its statutory roots. That's still very much a work in progress. Their goal was a 6-month timeline. I think very few people think that's going to be met. What I can tell you is so far there are 8 parts within the FAR that have had some changes posted already. In most of those cases, it's not all the changes that we're going to see for those 8 parts, let alone that we haven't seen any of the other parts even addressed yet. But presumably what they're doing is looking at all the clauses that are not required by statute with the goal of eliminating them. And many of us have doubts about whether they're going to go about that smartly or not, because it seems like they're, what's his name? Elon Musk used the metaphor of the chainsaw approach with regard to DOGE. And I think there's a lot of fear out there that that's a similar approach that they're going to be using with the FAR, where really it would be better, if not a scalpel, at least something other than a chainsaw. Let's compromise and make it a machete. But to make reasoned changes and reasoned deletions and reasoned alterations, hopefully. But right now, it's a little too early to tell whether that's going to be the way it goes, but certainly there's going to be change and we don't know what it's going to look like. And so we're just going to have to kind of go with the flow here. And that's going to be a general theme in this presentation is going with the flow is going to be important. I do want to address specifically the small business set aside and preference bullet at the bottom. There is, in my judgment, a clear indication that this administration is not going to be as friendly to small business as prior administrations of both parties. And they've already made reductions in the small business goals from where they were to the statutory minimum. So where the statutory minimum is 5% for a certain socioeconomic category, it had been at a higher level in previous years. It's right back to that 5% level now. That's going to make it harder for the small businesses to get a foot in the door. Similarly, the rule of 2 is under the microscope, let's put it that way. There already is indication that it will be eliminated in at least some contexts, not necessarily in all, but just in the past week, there have been changes indicating that the rule of 2 won't apply to orders, for example. And so we're just going to need to watch that carefully. But the overall thing to understand is that small business is kind of in the crosshairs. And obviously, we want you all to be able to succeed and thrive in this new environment. And so we just need to be aware of what's happening and plan accordingly. And then the third big piece is the GSA consolidation, where they're just pulling all of these contracts from that are currently being administered in other agencies into GSA. The most prominent examples are SOUP contract that's been in NASA and CIO SP contracts that have been in NITAC. Those are being pulled under GSA. And so that is going to change everyone's go-to-market strategy. So that's going to be something that we all need to adjust to and deal with. There are going to be plenty of other impacts that we don't really know yet. Again, here, how that's going to affect the small business community, we don't know yet. So there's still a lot of uncertainty here. And go with the flow. That's my theme today. Okay, so that's sort of at the high level what's happening. How's that impacting you all? Pretty clear. There have been canceled contracts, canceled procurements, revenue impacts. Many of you have lost your key POCs within the government agencies that you deal with. They're just not there anymore. So who do you even talk to, right? That's caused industry to have to do internal layoffs as well because they just don't have the cash flow to support a lot of the positions that they've had before, and particularly where the contracts were canceled, people on those contracts have nowhere else to go within the company, and they've just been laid off. So it's sort of a tsunami of impacts that are really, really challenging for industry and particularly for small business. And again, because there's still so much uncertainty, the question for all of us is, how do we make a plan, right? How do we have a strategy? We don't know what to do. Hopefully we can get to the start of some answers today. So these are the things I want to suggest in terms of strategies for how to respond. Pivot your pipeline is the first one. I'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Raise your voice. I'll talk about what that means. Engage with others. Reconsider your exit strategy. The two last ones are the two most important, which is don't panic, but be proactive. I'll get to that later on in this presentation, but these are the things that I'm going to address specifically. So in terms of pivoting your pipeline, there are four main pivots that I'm talking about. Again, none of this is new or unique to me. Plenty of other people have been talking about this. So I don't want to, suggest that I'm the only one that's talking about it, but reemphasize the fact. Within the federal market, it's going to be important to kind of pivot the pipeline strategy away from the agencies and programs that are at risk, which is primarily within the civilian agencies, and in particular, those that have been targeted specifically, like the Department of Education and the regulatory agencies. And of course, any program that has even a hint of DEI in it, whether it's a valid application or not, those things are going to be in the crosshairs. So if that's your customer base, if that's where you're working now, you're going to need to think about how to pivot away from those things, at least for now, because you cannot assume that that stuff will continue to be there. At the same time, the pivot is going to involve targeting new markets and customers that are less likely to be impacted. DOD is an obvious example of that, although even DOD is seeing some DOGE cuts and impacts. DHS, other than FEMA, is probably going to be okay. I mean, if you're working with CBP or ICE, for example, that's probably going to be pretty secure work because that's a big emphasis for this administration. National security and law enforcement in general, ATF, FBI, those are probably less likely to be impacted, although this administration does have some antipathy toward those agencies as well. So you just need to be alert. The intel community normally has its own sort of self-sustaining momentum, largely because their budget is often black box budget. So, that's less likely to be impacted, but that's a pretty narrow market. It's obviously, if you have a facility clearance and you have cleared personnel, you'll be able to work there. But if not. And truly, if you're not already working in the IC, it's hard to break into because they like to, they have people they know and trust to work with. Surprise, surprise, DOGE is actually starting to contract out some activity as well. So there may be opportunities there. So these are all potential pivot points for you within the federal market. Okay. The other big market that everybody's talking about is SLED. Many of you may already be working in that market to some degree, but it may be, even if you are, you're probably going to want to put more emphasis there. Now, usually the SLED market moves more quickly. Federal procurements can take years. Particularly the big GWACs take years before the proposals are done and the amendments are complete and the evaluation is done, and then the protests come, and 3 or 4 years later they finally make contract awards. That's not how things happen at the state level, largely because they don't have a 2,000-page FAR to deal with, but not that they have no bureaucracy at all, but it's typically quicker. And that presents some opportunities for the pivot, because if you're losing your federal work, then you're going to need to find work elsewhere. However, the caveat here, instead of one big set of rules, 2,200 pages long, which is what the FAR is now, it will cut down to less than that. They won't get to 100 pages, which is what they talked about briefly at the beginning, but that was insane. But there are 50 different sets of rules at the state level, right? And then when you get into local and education markets, you've even got more sets of rules to deal with. So that's a lot. And that can be as overwhelming, if not more so, than dealing with the FAR. And trying to just figure it out and navigate your way through it is going to be tedious and time consuming if you're not smart about it. The smart thing to do is not to try and work in all 50 states. You're not going to be able to do that. Okay. You shouldn't even try. The best thing is to target a few states, and target the states that are already buying what you sell and have independent revenue streams to support those requirements. Now, a few states kind of jump out immediately. The large states that have large budgets, like California and New York and Illinois, that have contracting budgets, procurement budgets in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's plenty of money there, and those states are going to be able to continue doing those procurements by and large. Sorry, did someone have a question? Okay, so they'll continue to be good states to target, but then there are other states where it may be a good target for you, depending on what kind of work you do, what kind of product or services you're selling. For example, North Carolina can be a target-rich opportunity because there's a lot of stuff going on in Research Triangle Park. So if you're doing work that would fit into the activity, the kind of activity that's going on in Research Triangle Park, then that's a good target for you. If you're not doing that kind of work, that won't be a good target for you, and you'll need to look elsewhere. There are opportunities everywhere. In February, I supported a client that submitted a proposal for a $250 million IT support contract to the state of Georgia. Now, first time I supported a client working on a state level procurement in Georgia. I wouldn't have thought of Georgia as being a prime target, but there they were with a $250 million procurement. So there are opportunities out there. The challenge is going to be finding them and then figuring it out, right? So that's going to be part of your pivot, is doing the research. There are resources out there to help you. I'm happy to make referrals to folks that can help you figure that stuff out, okay? The other thing to think about with regard to state level contracting, like the federal contracting market, it is very relationship driven. In some cases, even more so. It's really who you know, what kind of relationship you have, because they're less constrained in terms of regulations and statutes at the state level. And there are pluses and minuses to that, right? More opportunity for shenanigans, perhaps, but also more opportunities for you to develop relationships and get work through those relationships, even more so than getting work because, you make a better mousetrap, okay? So relationships are still going to be important, which means that it's still going to take you some time, because relationships don't happen overnight. Obviously, it takes time to develop, build, nurture relationships. In the states, much more so at the federal than at the federal level, local presence and local experience. It's sometimes even required that if you don't have an office in that state or locality, you're not going to be able to bid on that opportunity. So that's something to think about also as you develop your SLED strategy, is where are you already working? Where do you already have a presence? And again, It's sometimes required. Even if it's not required, it's typically a preferred qualification. And so you're just going to need to be aware of that and plan accordingly. The other thing to think about is the caveat here at the bottom that the states get a lot of their money from the feds, most of them. And that's just the reality. And what that means is the cuts that are happening at the federal level, particularly on the civilian side, are going to flow down to the state and local level. And that means there's going to be fewer dollars at those levels. So again, where this pivot is the most obvious one, and the one that people are talking about the most, bear in mind, it's not all lollipops and roses here, right? It's still going to require work. It's still going to require strategy, and it's still going to require relationship building. Okay. So that's the sled market. Sorry. Now, here's a market that a lot of people are not talking about, and I do because I have some experience here, and that's the international market. There are organizations like NATO and the UN that are, obviously international organizations. They have their own budgets and they have their own revenue streams, and they do a lot of contracting. NATO in particular does a lot of IT services contracting. So if that's your niche, that could be a market for you. You also can look at NGOs and even foreign governments. I've supported clients doing work with UAE, for example. They needed some IT support. They put out an RFP. Client responded to that, and we helped them with that proposal. So these are, this is a market you may not have even thought about, and it's something it's worth thinking about. Now, it may not be the right market for you, and that's okay. All I'm suggesting here is that it's worth considering. Obviously, these markets will be much less affected by what's happening at the federal level here. There's some ripple effects, but minimal. And in some cases, those markets will grow because of the changes that are happening here. Because, for example, we're already seeing that the EU is taking on more of the burden and looking at increasing their military stand up because they're expecting the U.S. to pull back from Europe, and so there may be more opportunities there. If you're, if you're doing military related work, you may be able to do that with the EU or with Australia or with other foreign countries. Okay. Now, the bad news is that if you never worked there in these markets before, you're not going to be able to just jump in and start making money. Not that easy, right? Because each of these markets has their own sets of rules and regulations. It's all very different than the federal rules and regulations you're used to dealing with, and even the state level rules and regulations that you might be familiar with. It's like learning a foreign language. No surprise, it's an international market. You're going to have to learn new languages, and that's going to be a challenge. Probably the reality is that in order to get into this market successfully, you're going to need to work with consultants who already have experience there. It could be someone who's already worked with, country X, Y, or Z, or someone who's already worked in the NATO environment or something like that. And again, that costs money, right? So you need to make that part of your strategy. If you choose to pursue this market, you're going to need to get help. And don't be shy about asking for help. That's going to be important because you're going to need it. On the other hand, if you take a look at this and you see what it's going to cost you to get that help and how complicated it's going to be to start working in this brand new market that you've never even thought about before, might not be for you, and that's okay, right? I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to do all of these things. Everybody ought to be at least thinking about all of these things, and everybody needs to do some of these things, is really what the message is today. And then the fourth pivot is, hey, why not sell to other businesses? If you're an IT services provider, there are businesses out there that need your services, right? And you can pretty quickly and easily pivot to the commercial space. Now, again, it's not all lollipops and roses. There are already companies in that space that are selling B2B, have been for years, that you're going to have to compete against. The other thing is, because it's not GovCon, it's a very different way of operating. And if you haven't already been selling B2B, you need to rethink the way you do sales. And it is more of a sales operation than a proposal type operation. It's really about sales. Just for one example, unsolicited proposals are very common in the B2B space, less so in the federal space, right? So it's a different market. It's in some ways a lower bar to entry in this market. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it gives you an option and an alternative to consider. So that's another pipeline pivot that you can make. So pipeline pivot within the federal market, in the SLED market, the international market, the B2B market. What are the other things you should be thinking about? So you need to raise your voice. Particularly small businesses have been less active in this arena. The major industry associations like the PSC are primarily populated by and serving the large businesses in the federal market. And they do a lot of lobbying, and they have some influence, or they have until now. It's not clear how much influence those organizations have at this point. But the point is that for the small business community, you're often kind of on the outside looking in, right? It's expensive to join the PSC. And even if you're a member of the PSC, it's hard to become an active participant because you get kind of crowded out to the side by the big boys. And so you need to figure out different ways to raise your voice and advocate for yourselves. And here are a few ways. One is talk to your legislators, your local legislators, your state legislators, your federal, your representatives and senators. And the best way is through old-fashioned phone calls. Don't just blast email people. That's not going to work. You're going to need to have real conversations. And the best way to do this is to contact the local office. So in other words, if you're thinking about your representative in Congress or your senator, don't contact their office on Capitol Hill. Contact their local office in, small town USA, wherever it's located, wherever you already have a presence, because at that point you're a constituent, and they actually pay attention to what constituents say at that grassroots level, and it's got a greater impact. Moreover, if you're making a phone call to a local office, you are much more likely to be able to have an actual conversation with an actual human being. If you call the congressional office, you're going to get a voicemail thing where they tell you to leave a message, and you're going to leave your message, and somebody may or may not listen to it, and then they may or may not do anything about it, right? That's not the most effective way. So start being active locally, right? With the people that have some ability to influence what's happening on the ground that's going to affect you. So contact your local legislators, contact them the old-fashioned way, and build those relationships and leverage those relationships, and make sure they understand how you are being impacted by everything that's happening at the federal level, and how that's going to cost jobs in their community. Their constituents are going to lose jobs. That has a real impact when they hear that. That's going to be important. You may not be in the habit of doing this now. You may never have done this before. Get started. Do this. I said I wasn't going to say that everybody should do everything, but everybody should do this. Honestly, You need to have these conversations. You need to let people know what's really going on. Another thing is to join the groups that can help you, even if you're a small business, groups that do lobbying at all levels of government, and you need to be active. You can't just join a group and then wait for the benefits of being a member to fall into your lap. This is a new universe. You've got to be active. This is kind of be the change you want to see in the world stuff, right? You've all heard that. So you need to be active in those associations and groups that are advocating for interests of companies like yours, because you're going to find it, you'll be much stronger together than independently, right? Ben Franklin supposedly said in the Continental Congress before the Declaration of Independence was written, he said, if we don't hang together, we will surely hang separately, right? That's the environment we're in right now. You've got to hang together. So be an active participant, be an active advocate. And then the third thing in this regard, in terms of raising your voice, is your marketing. You're probably already doing some marketing. If you aren't, well, get started. But even if you have been doing some marketing, you need to take a fresh look at it, right? It's identifying what really matters to your customers and what you do to help them. You're going to need to massage the message, as I call it, which is really rethink what your Kate's brief looks like and rethink what your marketing, your digital marketing looks like, and rethink all of those things and use every channel at your disposal, right? So marketing is not just LinkedIn, it's digital marketing, it's radio marketing, it's billboards, there are all kinds of different channels that you could use to get your message out there. Now, most of you don't have a marketing department. Any of you do, it's probably a small one, but regardless, it's likely you're going to want to bring in some help from outside. Somebody who's a marketing expert, is particularly a GovCon marketing expert. And again, I'm happy to make referrals. I know people who do that, right? I don't say this because I get a kickback from these folks. I don't. I do this because I want to help you guys succeed. And so as you think about your marketing, I'm happy to connect you to people that do marketing for federal government contractors and can help you position yourselves in the best possible way. Okay, but you've got to use your voice. You cannot be silent, wait for RFPs to come out on SAM and respond to them and expect that your proposal is going to win. It's a new ballgame. You also need to work with other people, right? And this, get out of your bubble is really what this is about. You're going to need allies. That's why joining those associations and lobbying groups is important. You're going to need to create new partnerships and really leverage the ones you have. So one of the things that small businesses in particular often don't focus on is working with other smalls. They're often looking at who are the largest that I can work with. Maybe they'll prime and I'll sub and I'll get some work from them and I'll build my past performance, and nothing wrong with that. You can continue to do that, right? But build partnerships with other smalls, because for the reduced number of procurements that are going to be out there and available, you want to position yourselves as a powerhouse team, right? You're not necessarily going to be the be all and the end all for any particular procurement unless you truly do have a better mousetrap, but that's rare, right? And so for the most part, the services that you're offering are pretty similar to the services that other companies offer in that same lane. However, if you partner with some of those other businesses, similarly positioned businesses like other smalls, you create a powerhouse team where your team is not simply about who do I need to fill a gap in the PWS. It's who can I partner with that will enable us to present ourselves as the best team for this opportunity and this customer? Okay, so build partnerships with other smalls. Also think about connecting with academic institutions, colleges and universities. There's a lot of innovation happening at that level, and they may be thinking about and doing things that you haven't. They may be on the leading edge of something that you aren't. And granted, if you're doing AI, you're on a leading edge, but let's be honest, ChatGPT is already 2 years old. And so it's old hat. So, if you're working with academic institutions, there's a lot of truly leading edge stuff going on there, and they can be helpful to you, and you can make them part of your bid team. And then just in general, look for innovators, right? Where is the real innovation happening that you can leverage and connect with those folks and work with them? Remember also that, the company that has been your biggest competitor can now be your biggest friend. And you're going to need to make friends with them. You probably have already done this to some extent in the past, but now is the time to start making those friends. The other thing that's going to help is getting help, right? I mentioned, if you need marketing help, I know people, right? But don't try to do it all yourself, because you're going to find that A, you're spreading yourself too thin trying to do everything yourself, and B, your expertise is good in some things, but not in others. And that's just a reality. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the reality. And so get help from other people who do have real expertise where you need it. And above all, leverage your network. Most of you have hundreds and thousands of people of connections on LinkedIn, as I do, right? Well, re-engage with those people, leverage those relationships. You don't have to go it alone, right? Government contracting has always been a team sport, but now more than ever, it is an even more important thing to build a team, right? You need a posse behind you, right? And so you need to connect with all these people that can help you and that you can help. I mentioned in the first bullet here, not only do you want to have allies, but you want to be an ally, right? Be of service to others. They will be much more likely to want to be of service to you. That's just a basic fundamental principle of relationships of any sort. It's very important now. Exit strategy, right? We don't often talk about this, and a lot of people now, frankly, are talking about it because things are looking bleak for many folks, and they're thinking about, looking for the door. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but the reality is, in this new environment, it's not going to be a good time to sell if that was something you were even thinking about. Because a lot of other companies are going to be looking for the exit, particularly over the next year or two. I think, particularly in the small business market, we're going to see a lot of contraction. There are going to be companies that just simply close their doors, go out of business, never to be seen again. That's just the reality, because they're not positioned well, and because they're losing their advantage, relation to set asides and small business preferences. They're going to be losing that advantage. So there are going to be a lot of small businesses that are looking to get out, but there's going to be a lot of others. And as a result, the valuations for all of those companies are going to drop. Supply and demand. The more companies that are looking to sell, the lower the prices are going to go. In addition, values will drop because small businesses that have, say, 3 or 4 good contracts that they've had for a while, and now all of a sudden 2 of those contracts have been canceled, so they don't even have attractive assets to sell anymore. Nobody is going to want to buy you at any price. that's a reality. I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but that's what I'm seeing. And so be aware that it's not going to be a good time to sell. On the other hand, there's never a bad idea to look at your options. I could be wrong about this, or you might have a particular niche that makes you an attractive an attractive target for a company looking to buy. Who knows, right? So I don't want to say just forget about it, but if selling in the near future has been part of your exit strategy, or you're now considering selling in the near future, you need to really reconsider whether this is the right time. You may not have a choice in terms of, if you're trying to get through this period, and you're finding, well, we don't have any revenue, how are we going to stay in business? That's a valid problem. I don't want to discount that. There are real challenges here facing everyone, especially the small business market. And so it's not necessarily a rosy picture. And I'm not here to shine people on. I tell people the truth as I see it. And sometimes it's not what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear. So this is an example of that. Now, a couple other things to talk about before we wrap up. One is don't panic, right? This is sort of contradicts what I just said in the last slide, but don't panic. I've talked to clients who have said flat out, we're just going to kind of hunker down and wait until the dust settles, and then we'll figure it out. And that is really the absolute wrong approach, right? You cannot wait this out because you will be left behind. It's just not a good strategy. And paralysis by analysis is part of that, right? When we're faced with this kind of existential fear, which is what it is, right? We tend to, you've heard of fight or flight, but there's actually a third response, which is fight, fly, or freeze. And organisms of any sort have a tendency to freeze. In fact, you see it in the animal kingdom. Certain species, when they sense danger, don't run and they don't turn and fight. They just freeze. They kind of play dead, right? Possums are the most obvious example of this, right? They play possum, right? This is not a good time to play possum, right? You do need to do something. So don't get paralyzed. Don't panic, right? You can forthrightly acknowledge the challenges that you're facing and the difficulties that you may have, and then get down to brass tacks and do something about it. And that leads to the next piece, which is be proactive, right? Don't passively wait for something to happen. Don't passively wait for somebody else to do something that will help you get through this. It's very easy to take on that attitude, but that's really, really dangerous. Make a plan, work the plan. It doesn't have to be a perfect plan. There is no perfect plan ever about anything in any circumstance. There's no such thing as a perfect plan. Some of you may remember when Mike Tyson famously said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? Then the plan goes out the window. Well, we're all getting punched in the mouth right now. So whatever plan we had is out the window. Whatever plan we make now, we're going to get punched in the mouth some more before this is all over. And that's okay. So don't worry about trying to have the perfect plan. Have a plan. Best thing to do is make it simple, right? Don't overcomplicate, right? And hey, there's some low-hanging fruit out there. Go for that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Maybe it means that it doesn't fit with your vision of who you are as a company. Okay. Bear in mind, hopefully this is going to be temporary. And another possibility is you can look at this as a way of revisioning who you are as a company. So the low-hanging fruit is still fruit, You don't have to starve just because, oh, I'm not used to the low-hanging fruit. I don't like to do that. Okay. At the same time, that's not your whole plan, right? If your whole plan is, well, I'm just going to go for the low-hanging fruit, pretty soon that fruit is going to be off the tree, and now you're going to be stuck with nothing again. So think about this in terms of short, medium, and long-term planning, right? Short-term, low-hanging fruit, fine. Medium-term, find a new fruit tree. Longer-term, plant a new grove of fruit trees. You see what I'm saying? It's like there's different pieces of this puzzle, and all of those things should be part of what you're thinking about and doing now. So you're going to need to be creative and flexible and nimble. Now, small businesses, you already know how to be nimble. It's part of the differentiator that you present when you propose to the government to begin with, right? You're more nimble than, a $50 billion company or a $100 billion company, right? Those guys have resources that you don't have, but you have the ability to change directions on a dime that they don't have. So take advantage of the advantages you do bring to this equation. And remember that there are no bad ideas, truly no bad ideas, right? Now, there may be ideas that you choose not to pursue. That's okay, because you don't want to just go willy-nilly doing everything just because somebody thought about it. But let's not self-censor the ideas in this environment where we need to be coming up with different strategies than what we're used to. So brainstorming, get everybody in a room with your whiteboard and do it the old-fashioned way. Just do, a real kind of mind meld with a bunch of people in a room. Or if you're geographically dispersed, do that on Teams and use the whiteboard function of the technology, and just get some ideas down on paper, metaphorically, and then start working your way through those ideas. Oh, this looks promising, or yeah, this doesn't really seem like a good idea, or this doesn't seem like something that's going to work for us. Fine, you'll separate things into piles. Initially, it'll be a definitely yes pile, definitely no pile, and a maybe pile. And initially, that maybe pile is going to be the big pile, and you'll have fewer things in the definite no and definite yes piles. But just like when you're clearing clutter in your house and you have a keep, donate, and I don't know yet pile, when you're doing that, same thing here. What you want to do is do those piles initially, do that as quickly as you can, and then take the maybe pile or the I don't know pile, and then work through that pile as quickly as you can so that you can move some of those things into the yes pile or the no pile without spending too much time on. Okay. Once you've done that to a certain level of fidelity, and you won't finish the job and it won't be perfect, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm repeating myself, right? Then go back to your yes pile and start figuring out, okay, we've got some ideas here. How are we going to do these things that we've decided we want to do and we think we can do, right? That's kind of the process you need to engage in. So I hope that has given you some things to think about. I am more than open to questions or suggestions. Maybe you all have some ideas that weren't in the slide deck that you can share with everybody else on the call. Let me know.
Thanks, Lindsay, and great presentation, David. Quick clarification. You mentioned that the rule of two was under scrutiny. Is that going to mean that procurement officers are going to have the ability to make procurements even if just one company responds, or are they going to be required to go through a more formal RFP process and they can't just do a procurement if two people respond? Which way is it going to?
So I think there will still be some discretion for contracting officers in both directions, but the primary concern about the rule of two is that it's going to go away. So in what I mean by that is, if they do an RFI and they get 2 or even 3 responses from small businesses that seem like they're qualified, There's no longer going to be requirement that they have to make it a small business procurement, which is
Ah,
going to make it much more difficult for smalls to operate because they're going to just be able to say, you know what? Yeah, there's a few smalls that might be able to do this, but I still want to have GDIT do this work or a company like GDIT. And so I'm just going to put out a full and open RFP and GDIT will bid on it. And those small IT service providers will be left in the dust. That's the big concern.
got it. Thank you.
Mhm. Thanks for the question.
Absolutely.
Anybody?
It looks like this is a kind of broad strokes question, David, but I'm sure you
Okay.
can handle. When does it get better?
How much time do you have? So, um, the answer to this may largely depend for individual people on their individual attitude toward this administration. That's the reality, because there are going to be some people who are supporters of this administration and what they're doing, and they're going to say, "Hey, it's getting better now. This is what we should be doing." Right? There are other people at the other end of the spectrum who are going to be saying, "This is only going to get better when these guys are gone." Right? Most people may be somewhere in the middle. The truth is, the only honest answer is nobody really knows. Right? I mean, it's a perfectly valid question, but it has no answer because we don't know. Again, we're only a few months into this administration, so we don't know. We've already seen a lot of sort of backing and forthing in some of these things. We've already seen that the impacts at the ground level that are just starting are already changing some of the policies that they're pursuing. Most recently, in the past week, the sort of back and forth about immigration raids and where they're being carried out. This isn't related to contracting per se, but it's an example that you know the grassroots were starting to tell the administration, you can't just raid the restaurants and the farms and the places because we won't have any employees. Our businesses are going to go out of business. You've got to stop this, right? And so there was some backtracking then. Then there was guidance that said, nope, we're still going to do those things. This is going to go back and forth because of that kind of uncertainty. It's just impossible to predict when things are going to settle down and we'll have some sort of new normal. And it's possible we may never have a new normal in reality. It'll be a new normal, but it won't look like any kind of normal any of us is used to. And we won't recognize it as normal. So I wish I had a better answer than that, but that's the best I can do.
Our government contractor chat complimentary Zoom webinar series will be the third Wednesday of each month, excluding August and December, from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Wednesday, July 16th, we will have Ben Madden, HR SME and owner of HR Action, presenting AI plus HR, transforming talent management and federal contracting. To register for these webinars, you can scan the QR code on the screen now. Thank you for your time today. We'll see you in July.